Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it's time for the Q&As. What I decided to do is this week, like I did last week, is just an easier format for me to just come in and voice over. I'm going to use a lot of the training footage from last week from the gym, put that up, and if you guys want to know what all I'm doing there, of course, that footage is up with descriptions of it from earlier in the week. And also for a lot of people, new people are like, hey, where do I get my questions answered? I start a thread on the Jason Blaha Fitness Facebook fan page, and I stick it at the top every Thursday. And Sunday morning, I come through and I pick the question. So if you want your question answered, that's where you go to get it done. But let's go ahead and knock this out. All right, first question. How do you calm down after a deadlift session? I'm trying to finish my deadlift workouts until 7 to 8 p.m. so that my nervous system has some time to settle before I go to sleep. But it is often the case that I struggle to fall asleep as I am too agitated following a deadlift session. I lay off the phone and other electric light sources, sleep in an almost pitch black room, so that all these factors do not contribute much to me staying awake. Would a melatonin supplement help? Thanks, Jason. Alright, there's a few different factors going on here when we're talking about not being able to sleep after a heavy deadlift session. A lot of it has to do with elevated heart rate, elevated cortisol, all of these things. But a big part of it has to do with peripheral nervous system fatigue. What I might suggest to you is that since you're having to deadlift in the evening, and you need to understand deadlift, you can only handle so much workload anyways, and oftentimes you will build your deadlift strength by doing other exercises that actually train similar motor patterns, build up all the weak links. So depending upon what you're doing, if you're doing the latter and you're only doing peak sets on deadlifts, go ahead and back it down a notch. It could be a sign that you're starting to overreach as a result of this exercise. You're not getting enough recovery for your peripheral nervous system, all of that. It might be time to decrease the workload on it. Just a thought, maybe don't grind it out quite as hard. Don't do grinders. The other thing to consider there is that, getting to sleep could be an issue for you due to psychological arousal as well, which kind of goes back to the other point of something that Matt Perryman was looking at a lot with his doctoral work. Seems to be that psychological arousal actually oftentimes contributes to overtraining more than the actual work does. Meaning, if you deadlift 405 for 6 reps, it's not just that contributes. And if you really psych yourself up and yell and scream and jam to some Slayer or whatever it is that you happen to listen to, and you get really psyched up to lift that weight, it has a larger impact on nervous system recovery than if you just calmly and casually with deep breathing had walked up and calmly lifted the exact same weight for the same number of reps. So psychological arousal is an issue, which also comes to the topic of pre-workouts as well. If you use pre-workouts before you train, this is probably the primary cause of your situation. Do something about it. Also, don't jam really hard, fast music, and learn to stay calmer when you deadlift. Now, if none of that seems to help, your other issue is, like you said, consider a melatonin supplement, consider an antihistamine, consider a glass of red wine before bed. There's a lot of different methods you can use to help yourself sleep as far as getting everything in check. What I don't recommend is that you go to sleep pills of any type, though, like a trazodone or something like that, because that absolutely reduces the quality of your sleep, which is not what you need as a lifter or an athlete. All right, next question. How do you stop binge eating? It's stopping me from achieving my fat loss goals. I'm afraid this binge eating could kill me. It's like I have no control. All right, under this question, this person had actually generated a bit of conversation. Other people chimed in, other people spoke to him and gave their take on it. And he said, look, I've already seen a psychologist, because that's usually the first tip. And the psychologist had told him to try to eat 2,500 calories a day, stop classifying foods as good and bad. And you know what? And the person's still binge eating. So it's pretty obvious the psychologist might not know what they're talking about. All right, I'm going to talk to you as someone who has a historical issue of being an emotional eater. Again, just due to various depression and stuff I've suffered through my life, PTSD, anxiety, things like that. I can honestly tell you that for me, binge eating, and this is only my personal anecdote because your psychologist has their own advice for you, my personal anecdote is that for me, binge eating is triggered by certain foods that are very, very hyper palatable that I have developed some sort of emotional attachment to. And here's the problem we run into. Yeah, thinking of food as purely good and bad isn't always psychologically healthy. But being a binge eater with emotional attachments to food isn't psychologically healthy either. So the question becomes, in the meantime, are you worried more about fixing the long-term psychological hang-up, or are you concerned with saving your health and not harming yourself by being obese and binge eating while you're working on the other? I'm going to say at this juncture, the immediate is going to be more important. I'm not saying don't continue to work with a therapist. You should. But your trigger foods, you need to avoid them. All right? Don't have them at all. If you know that you have foods that are going to trigger your binge eating, don't eat them. Don't have them in your home. Don't buy them. All right? If your trigger food is mint chocolate chip and cookies and cream ice cream, don't buy the crap. Don't have it in your house. Avoid it, and please let friends and family know. Please don't offer that sort of stuff to you. That you're trying to lose weight, that you have a binge eating problem, and that it's a trigger food for you, and you'll overeat that one food. So politely ask them not to bring it around you or offer it to you as well. And that's really one of the best strategies you can do. Is you need to just completely avoid your trigger foods. All right, next question. Do you ever feel that your focus on deadlifts detracts from being well-rounded? Yes, you have a massive thick back, hams, glutes, but what about quads, chest, shoulders to match it? Is it lacking? Yes, posterior chain dominant is better than being anterior chain dominant, but that goes back to your analogy of a 22 in the foot is not as bad as a 45. But why do either? Honestly, that's pretty funny that you would say that because you clearly don't follow my training and have never followed what I actually do at the gym, if you believe that. I've gone while on YouTube 9 months straight without doing a deadlift. So I'm not sure what you're even implying there. And as far as deadlifts go, the majority of the time, other than when I was doing the deadlift every day, when I was also squatting every day, which again, quad dominant, and bench pressing heavy 3 times a week, I really only did peak sets of deadlifts, meaning I only do 1 set. Now, I did some phases of accumulation work, and earlier this year, back in January, February, all of that, because I'd quit squatting, yeah, I was doing accumulation work with deadlifts, but I have always, for the course of that, this entire time I've had a focus on deadlift. Actually, I've kept overhead pressing at a higher volume than my deadlifting. When I was doing pure powerlifting, I always kept both my squat volume and my bench press volume higher than my deadlift volume. So I've never actually had a focus on the deadlift in that regard. I've only in the last year stepped forward and said the deadlift is my number 2 priority. Overhead pressing is my top priority. And I would go so far as to say that in an average week, it's not uncommon for me to do 15 sets of overhead press and only 1 or 2 sets of deadlift, and that's what I call focusing on the overhead press and the deadlift. So it's just, that's kind of weird that you would say that, because I still have massive quads and my chest is ridiculous. My chest is bigger now than when I was doing pause reps for sets of 5 with 315 on the bench press on camera on YouTube here. So again, weird question. I'm not sure where you get that. As far as my arms go, I just don't have great arm genetics, and I've torn a bicep previously. So arm development, and I have really long arms, doesn't come easy to me. I've actually put a lot of work into it, believe it or not. I've done thousands of sets of curls and tricep extensions since I've been on YouTube. In fact, I go so far as to say I've done more curls than I've done deadlift sets, probably 3 times as many. Since I've been on YouTube. So again, just kind of a weird question. It's kind of like you're just looking at someone's genetic structure and assuming they do something a certain way. No, it's just the way oftentimes our genetics are. And the deadlift comes really easy to me, so I don't have to do a lot of volume with the deadlift. I'm just naturally good at it because of my structure, because I have massive glutes, because I have massive hamstrings and erectors before I ever touched a weight, and I have fairly long arms. The deadlift is actually really easy for me. I don't actually work that hard at it, believe it or not. I don't have to. Same thing. The highest deadlift I've ever hit was like 655. Quite frankly, my deadlift workload wasn't that high when I did that. I've always had to work much harder for things like bench press than I have the deadlift. So again, it's people not understanding. Someone's looking at their structure and just seeing that they don't have 22-inch arms and they have a big back and assume that's because they do nothing but deadlift and don't train arms. Again, this is someone who asking a question like that who just really doesn't follow my training, but I felt it was worth addressing. All right, next question. Jason, after your noob gains, how much will getting stronger benefit your physique? I'm thinking that if muscle gains slow down to barely noticeable, wouldn't it be better to be focused on getting ripped instead if your goals are just to look great? An example would be I got my incline bench at 225. What's the point of getting it to 275 if the difference will be minimal? Same with chins. If I max out my linear progression gains, what's the point of getting it to 100 pounds if there will not be a lot of gains? Wouldn't it be better to focus on getting 8% body fat and look good and just maintain my strength? Thanks. You know what, brother? That's a totally individual thing. I mean, what I would say to you is that if you're happy with the size of your chest right now at a 225 incline bench for work sets, okay, then don't worry about getting a bigger chest. If your biceps are as big as you possibly want them and you do 12 dead hang chin-ups, why bother to get strong on the weighted chin-up? Well, there isn't a reason. If you're happy with your strength and you're happy with your muscle mass, there's no actual reason to increase anything. There isn't. But as far as your other question goes, I think at the end of the day, you might find you might want more size. But as far as the 8% body fat goes, it's like I tell people all the time, don't go under 10% body fat. If you're drug-free and you don't have certain genetic traits, meaning certain people genetically can get leaner without having problems, don't go under 10% body fat. You will look just fine and have the beach body look you're probably seeking at 10% body fat. 8% body fat when you get that shredded look. If you're trying to look aesthetic to the general population or women, and I'm going to assume that's your case because you're not talking about getting to a 300 incline bench and doing heavy as hell weighted chin-ups, you're probably not trying to get massive. You're probably trying to achieve that beach body or model look, which is usually in the 10 to 11% body fat range. 8% body fat is actually bad for your health. For most people, it will cause a loss of testosterone. It will cause psychological problems. It will cause hormonal problems. I don't recommend you cut that lean. And I'm not saying that as someone who's has anything to do with myself, because people say, oh, you're saying that because you're not ripped. It's like, no, I'm saying it because I don't want people to get hurt by it. I'm looking out for your best interest there. Get to 10% body fat. And you know what? What I would say to you is reassess it when you get there. You might get at any point in our life and say, okay, I'm happy where I'm at in this area. And if you are, then fine, work on something else and maintain it. And then see how you feel later. Because you might change your mind at it. And if you do, then you'd say, well, I need my biceps to get bigger. I would like another ½ inch on my bicep. Well, you're going to want to get stronger on weighted chin-ups then. Pretty straightforward. All right, next question. If someone's goal is to get a really big, wide, and round shoulders, and it's the muscle he wants to prioritize, does he just need to get really strong on the overhead press and then do some face pulls for shoulder health? Or would he need to do some form of lateral raises as well? In other words, once someone gets really strong on the overhead press, would his side delts be covered as well, or does he need to do some isolation work for them anyway, since overhead pressing mostly emphasizes front delts? A lot of this depends on the person. You'll see a lot of people who say, look, the overhead press doesn't build really big overall delts, just front delts. But then again, I've known guys, natty guys, even middle-aged natty guys with really impressive shoulder girdles who focus really heavily on overhead pressing, and that's actually what they do. Other people might need a side lateral raise to balance things out. You know what? I'm going to say to you that you don't really know till you mess with it a bit. The thing to keep in mind, though, I would tell people focus on face pulls first as a priority, because they improve shoulder health. They still might give you the additional side delt stimulation you need, because remember, overhead pressing does work the side delts to some extent, maybe not tremendously, but it does, and they will grow from it. Face pulls, we have plenty of EMG data showing that face pulls, particularly with bands, really hit the side delts particularly hard. As far as adding laterals in, it's going to depend on your goals. It's going to depend on what sort of results you're getting from the other stuff that you are trying to do. There is no one size fit all to something like muscle balance and lagging muscle groups. Some people can get everything that they want in a muscle from just selecting the right compound movements. Other people will need additional isolation work in order to reach a goal. So it's going to depend on, number one, your genetics, number two, the time frame you're looking at, and number three, what you mean by really big delts, because that's ultimately what it comes down to. Your view of it might be totally different from someone else's. I would say for a lot of people, their concept of what they think is really big delts that they want is actually going to require site enhancement, not just training and drugs. They're going to actually have to put stuff in the muscle. So it's all relative. It's relative to what your perception is of really big delts and what you're trying to achieve. So again, look at it from that perspective. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.